is on thin ice, and that ice is melting fast.
Young Americans who have spent years marching, rallying, demanding that Congress act on climate change, this bill is for you.
This report is a clarion call to massively fast-track climate efforts by every country and every sector and on every time frame. In short, our world needs climate action on all fronts, everything, everywhere, all at once.
Hello, Antonio. Welcome to Environmental Coffee House. Everybody, it's great to see you out there. It's been a while since we've had you with us. Hi.
Oh, hey, I'm happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I like your background too. We've got the newsroom thing going on. Yeah. So what's going on? Why don't you give us the overview of what we are doing tonight? And then we can say hi to everybody while you're doing that.
Yeah, so tonight we're going to be talking about an update on climate change, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change's latest updated sectional report. And then we'll also talk about what's happening in terms of global emissions and here in the United States, what we're doing to respond to the climate change crisis, what the Biden administration and the Democratic Congress had put forth the Inflation Reduction Act and what its impacts are going to be to the climate crisis, or what sort of emission reductions we're expected to see with the manifestation and full implementation of that act.
Excellent. Oh boy, do we have a full show. We sure do. So I had, well, let me say hi to everybody really quickly while they're joining, because I didn't have a very long beginning, which I really didn't want to have a very long beginning. And Beela's here. Osama. And Kay Ryan and Human Love and Solidarity. Scott Andrew, Karen Reese. Hi. Kim, thank you for moderating. Hey, Jude. Trulia. Guest, you're here, and Poppy's here, but the truth, it sure is hot out there. This is wonderful. Volt Revolt. It's really great to see everyone here with us to give Antonio a rousing applause for coming back. So what you been doing?
Well, in my own personal life, I've been doing a lot of work, unfortunately. Trying to keep abreast with a lot of the social crises that we're facing, listening very closely to Solicitor General Praligar's argument to the Supreme Court for student loan debt reduction. You know, that personally, of course, impacts me, but other 42 million Americans. So there's a lot on the docket.
There's a lot. You're right. But I'm glad that you're watching that. It does affect you. It affects Dawn. It affects my kid. You know, it affects, like you said, millions of people. So that's on the personal front, which is good. Thank you. So what would you like to do? Where would you like to start? How would you like to start this?
Start just by looking at the latest Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change's updated sectional report.
All right. I guess I can pull that baby up. If you give me a second, guys. Yes, while everybody's still joining too, which is great. I'm going to get our screen share going. All right. So what do you want to look at first? We have the press release. We have the actual sixth assessment here, which is pretty much covers it all. And then we have, why don't we look at this?
Okay.
Are you there? You got it open? All right. So this was the synthesis report. And why don't you tell everybody exactly how it all came together?
So the synthesis report is essentially AR6. It is the sixth generation report, of course, in a series of intergovernmental panel climate change reports. The first one obviously was released in 1990, AR1. So this is the sixth iteration of this report. There are intermediate special reports that come in between each of the major assessments. This particular report, the Simpsons report, is meant to tell us about the total impact that climate change thus far has had on human societies, our total contribution to climate change through our atmospheric emissions, but it's also supposed to explain to us climate attribution. That is, how climate change is attributing more to extreme events happening around the world, like, say, the extreme water-related hydrologic exchange, extreme events happening in the great state of California that many of us have been watching and witnessing for over the last month and a half here. So this report does a detailed analysis on what attribution science has to say in terms of how climate change is directly attributing to worsening and extreme weather around the world. But also the report looks at where we've gone so far in terms of emissions and what toward type actions that we have to take in order to meet that aspirational goal of 1.5, and then of course the long shot goal of 2 degrees Celsius.
The aspirational goal being the kind of like the the word of the hour, huh? Aspirational goal. So would you like me to go somewhere on this page?
Yeah, I mean, we
All
can.
right.
The summary for policymakers is usually a good.
Good start off.
Yeah,
All right. You
I,
know,
I would
I
argue, and
what?
as I have argued before, is that the policy summary makers is the most important part of the assessments because, of course, it is the only part that the policymakers look at. So most
True.
policymakers don't have the time or even the desire to look at the totality of this assessment. And of course, the assessments are over 1,000 pages. So um, usually
They are heavy.
Usually the summaries are between 30 to 50 pages, I believe. So they're much more digestible.
All right. Well, start digesting. Or yeah, start digesting.
So in this latest report, the main takeaways are that the report and scientists recognize that countries are having increasingly challenging times dealing with the climate crisis. What we're starting to see, of course, is the manifestation of a lot of the climate models that we've seen before in terms of countries being impacted with severe drought, with severe hydrological changes, with severe heat zones and heat stresses. So this report goes into what that actually looks like in terms of what does a 1.2 degrees C world, how has that contributed to more extreme activity in terms of the climate around the world. And so what this report does is break down exactly what those impacts look like so far at our 1.2 degree world. And again, it's meant to confirm the fact that, yes, we understand that many governments are still in concern. Yes, this is human activity, but how much is the climate actually interfering, or how much is human activity interfering with the climate? This assessment is here to answer that question, that we are definitively interacting with the climate and that we can actually track and tell and discern how much climate warming is attributing to certain extreme weather events. So this report is meant to answer a lot of those concerns that perhaps critics have had about what the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change's assertion is about how much climate change is actually caused by our own activities.
And they say urgent in the press release, urgent climate action can secure a livable future for all. And then they go in and talk about why. So where are you here?
So,
Did you want to read it? Did you want to talk about this piece
so
with the
I
opening?
on
All
my
right.
screen the text is a little bit too small for me to
Okay.
read without
All right.
putting my face into there. If you
Well,
want to do some of the reading and I can kind of
yeah.
respond to that.
Okay, well, all I wanted to do was open up and just say that they talk about the multiple feasible and effective options to reduce greenhouse gas emissions uh, to human caused climate change. and they go into the losses and damages. They talk about the clear way ahead, enabling sustainable development. I mean, basically a lot of the same, a lot of the same things. And then here they have a temperature scale equivalent. 1.1 C equals 2 degrees F Fahrenheit. 1.5 C is 2.7. So it's just a very, very light overview. And as we knew from IPCC, from COP27, a lot of it was about loss and damage, tons of it. So,
Well, and that was kind of one of the conversations that came up not only at the last COP, but again at Davos. I know that that whole thing is very controversial, but the whole idea is that there's a climate fund that countries are supposed to work cooperatively and pull together. Well, this climate fund of $100 billion is, of course, doesn't exactly meet the challenges that the countries are facing from the type of climate extremes that we are starting to see, and particularly those countries in the developing world. Of course, so there was a lot of focus on that loss and damages component as it's related to increasing climate extremes. And yes, there is still time, according to the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, for drastic action to reduce our carbon dioxide and greenhouse gas emission into the atmosphere. Right now, we're at a total about 420 parts per million of CO2 in the atmosphere today. But what the IPCC stresses is that, and we'll focus a little bit on what the U.S. is doing, because despite what many people might think, the U.S. is a example of effective emission reduction over the last 20 years. But essentially, what the argument is that countries can continue to develop by decoupling their carbon emissions from their development, and in so doing, investing lots of money into their renewable energy sectors and clean energy technologies, such as development of solar, wind, and electric cars. And we're
yeah.
starting to see that this is something that, of course, has been happening in the European Union for at least the last 15 to 20 years, but more so increasingly, of course, China being the world leader in the development of wind turbines, solar panels, and development of electric vehicles. But also you're starting to see, and we'll get into, the US's response. And so what this assessment realizes is that the sort of action that we're starting to see, if we were to double it or triple it or even quadruple the type of effort, we could actually start seeing meaningful reductions in our CO2 output into the atmosphere. And it still says that if we still have time, that 2030 timeline, to cut our emissions sufficiently to keep us 80% of the ensemble, that's the model ensemble, shows that we can still stay within the 2 degrees, although that 80% also shows us breaking the 1.5 degree mark. So only about
Yeah.
20% of the most latest models show that we can still stay within the 1.5 aspirational goal.
And you don't think that basically it's just kicking the can down the road?
Well, I will say that, of course, the action that we've seen so far has been lackluster. It doesn't actually meet the challenges that we put forth. Again, talking about in the United States case, which is the case example I look most closely at, with the passage of the Inflation Reduction Act, we saw that the United States did put forth about $370 billion over a 10-year period of time. In that sense, it is the largest climate package that the United States has delivered so far. But we have to remember that this is paling in comparison. The plan that was originally put forth by Bernie Sanders, which was leading the committee on this, was $3.5 trillion. So
Oh,
that's an
yeah.
order of magnitude more spending over the decade than what we're getting from here. And then also, we have to remember keeping this in proportion with the type of plans that Congressman Rocano was talking about, Elizabeth Warren during the 2020 presidential campaign, of course, Bernard Sanders. Those plans were in excess of 10 to 20 trillion dollars over 10 years. So this is really just a drop in a bucket. You might say, if you're thinking about this more optimistically, that this might be the first down payment, but it does actually do something in terms of reducing our emissions. Sandy, do you mind just, I know this is a little out of order, but do you mind bringing up that graphic about the United States emissions?
I absolutely do not mind any of it. Okay, let's get the emissions graphic. Sorry, guys, I'm a verbal worker. I can't help myself. All right, here we are.
Okay. So that's the global, and we can talk about this one first. It's
Yep.
fine. So this is what the
Well,
scheme
we could
looks like
take.
for
You
our.
want the U.S. one? I can change it.
Well, we can talk about that one next. That's
All
fine.
right. Okay.
So this is what the scheme looks like so far for our global emissions. As you can see, it's a pretty straightforward pathway. Now, this is obviously the most meaningful graph because ultimately what this graph does will determine our climate future. But it's also important to see what type of actions that countries like the United States, which make up 5% of the world's total population, but almost 20% of the world's emission output. It's very important to see what countries like us are doing because, at least in terms of technological innovation, perhaps other countries could learn from us or share in those technologies in order to make the same type of emissions reduction in their development process as we have. So this graph, in short, has showed that from 1960 on to the 2020 period and just beyond, what our emissions trend has looked like. As you can see, both financial pullbacks or collapses are taking part here. You see there's a decline in our trajectory of emissions in the 2008 period after the onset of 2008 2009 financial crisis. And then, of course, you see the most latest kind of gyration in our emissions, and that was caused by, of course, the uncoordinated COVID 2019 or 2020 pandemic policies that governments pursued, basically locking down, shutting down their populations. And obviously that had a dramatic effect, at least for that period of time, on global emissions, the emission into the atmosphere. But nonetheless, as you can see, it's kind of leveled off. If you look closely, you can see that emissions are still starting to rise, rebound from that point. So now do you want to talk a little bit more about what's happening in the U.S., what our
Sure.
line is
And
like?
I just want everybody to put a Q in front of any questions, and I will be collecting them for towards the end, and we can talk about any questions anybody has. So just make sure you put a Q. All right. All right. Here we go. Here we are.
Okay, so this is the U.S. graph. So this is kind of where our emissions looks like over the last 20 odd years. Of course, this comes from the Energy Information Agency in the United States. And as you can see, we've actually been making notable progress on our emissions. So we are down from a peak of just over 6,000 million or 6 billion tons of carbon emission into the atmosphere to now just being under 5 billion tons of emission. Of course, in the Inflation Reduction Act passed by the Democratic Congress and led by the Biden administration, the pledge here is to reduce, making good on our Paris pledges, of course, under the Obama administration. The pledge here is to reduce American emissions by 50% of that 2005 level. So if you can go look at 2005, you can see that we're almost exactly on 6 billion metric tons of emission into the atmosphere. So hopefully what they're saying by 2030 is, or at least the optimistic view by the administration, is that with the inaction of the Inflation Reduction Act and the climate provisions within the act, that we can get to 50% of the 2005 level. So that you actually can't see that here, but that would be about 3 billion tons of emission into the atmosphere by 2030 is the projected trend line. Is that possible given what exactly the Inflation Reduction Act does? Well, that depends on who you are. Some people say that it's much too optimistic, that we're really not going to see those type of reductions. We might see something closer to 10 to 20%, and the more optimistic, of course, say that we're going to get closer to that 50%. So what the Inflation Reduction Act does is it does provide credits for electric cars, so people who will be purchasing electric vehicles in the United States, particularly electric vehicles that are made by union companies, are going to receive an electric car credit that will reduce, obviously, the total expenditure of that electric vehicle, but also people will be getting additional credits on things like solar panels. So if they want to solarize their home, that's something that they'll also get additional credits for. But also you'll see credits for the implementation of home batteries as well, as that's becoming a more popular consumer technology. People are putting battery storage into their homes, and so you'll see additional credits to reduce that price as well. But you'll also see that there's bigger things like some additional funding for electric car chargers, which is desperately needed. Of course, we need that infrastructure if we're going to start to electrify our transportation fleet. Of course, we're going to need the infrastructure in order to do that. So this bill tries to speak to that. Of course, it doesn't go as far as what the Biden administration had originally planned, and that was 500,000 electric car chargers in the United States by 2030. So we won't be exactly getting that goal, but at least this will help companies in their endeavor in providing those products for people who are trying to make the transition, or at least have the money to do so. But there's also
I
does
would
something
like
that's really
to. I mean, I would. I would like to be off the grid, but the power's so inexpensive where I live, as everybody knows. It's a small municipality, but I'd like some backup solar. I mean, I would. Even though I know what the mining does to the earth. I know the problems, but I would like to go out not burning carbon.
my parents actually do have a solar setup and
Do you?
battery, so
All right.
but again, a personal take, yes, but my parents can afford these things, and they are quite expensive, and
Yeah.
that's part of the problem with this transition is that we're really asking the public to flip a lot of the bill on this. We're asking people to personally buy electric cars. We're asking people to personally solarize their homes, and these are expensive technologies. And when people already don't have the means
Yeah.
to afford basic life, and
Basic
the
life.
report actually
Yeah, good one.
well, and the report takes us in that, of course, economic inequity has a slowing effect on our ability to quickly transfer. You saw what happened with in I was going to say in Deutschland, and but with the Dutch, there's a lot of backlash from the farmers because
Yeah.
the Dutch government had enacted policy to try to reduce nitrogen emission into the atmosphere, methane emission into the atmosphere from the agricultural sector, and that was going to require a lot of the farmers there to reduce the number of cattle that they had on their land, and of course that would impact their income. And so, we're still dealing with this. And of course, that's something that other reports, also mentioned, particularly when we're talking about the IAE. Or excuse me, yes, the International Energy Agency, when they're doing their World Outlook assessments, they still continue to do these assessments. But yes, that the transition was going to be challenging because there are these economic inequities that do exist and that would cause populations to sort of resist those type of enactments or policy enactments.
Yeah.
But fortunately, in the U.S. case, again, the Inflation Reduction Act really does try to minimize the cost expenditure onto the average American. And in fact, it tries to tackle some of this by bringing a lot of the supply chain distribution to the United States. So when it comes to rare earth element development for solar panels and for wind turbines and for batteries, we're trying to bring this here to the United States. And also that will actually have the impact of reducing our emissions as well by having much shorter supply chains and things like that, and making our logistics more domestic. We'll see a small reduction, obviously, in transportation emissions as it responds to that. But also there was a lot of talk about investing, with what we saw with the disaster in East Palestine, Ohio. A lot of people are talking about this is also an opportunity that we can look at the railroad sector and see how we can reduce emissions there, and we can also make the transport of environmental of these potentially dangerous materials safer by updating the type of braking systems that we have, the type of tracks that we have, and this can also be a way that we can reduce our environmental impact, not so much as related to climate change as it is about the environmental impact. But as we know, there's over 1,000 train derailments happening in the United States. So
Yep.
the environmental impact is important to also to bear in mind as well.
So here's the article on the Hill that is saying 6 months in, and this is brand new, the Inflation Reduction Act is already unleashing clean energy's potential. So, I mean, this is a mainstream media article, and it's not a lot of time, they say, but and the chat's going crazy with lots of questions they want to ask you. But how do you feel about all of this 6 months in your estimation and what in your studies?
Well, so the way that I put this is, obviously I'm very political. And what I say is that obviously the Biden administration has been the most productive and most effectual presidency of my lifetime, obviously outstripping the Obama administration. Of course, I don't, the Trump administration, the Republican administrations. So it is optimistic in that sense that for the first time in American history, since our scientists have been telling us that we're in crisis, we are actually responding. Now, of course, that response doesn't arise to the challenge that we face, and it doesn't actually come anywhere close, but it is something. So that's positive. Because what we saw for the last 40 years was a system that was completely unresponsive to the realities happening on the ground. So it is nice to see that America is becoming less extreme in the sense that we are recognizing we are a human species. Our society is under vicious assault. Of course, it's self-inflicted from the damage we've done to the biosphere, and it's actually time that we start restoring the state of the planet. And we've just began to get on that journey. Imagine if you're sitting here comfortably where I am in North Carolina and you're packing to go see Sandy. This would be like literally stepping out of the front door. We've not even yet got into the car.
Right.
But we are on our way.
So you've changed your thinking a bit. You think we're going to actually, well, okay, let me preface this. I think we're going, the free market is going to do whatever it's going to do. Even if the ship's going down, we're still going to build electric cars. We're still going to have all of this. And so you're saying that the Inflation Reduction Act really did or is having some kind of, well, the Hill said it too, the business, part. It's having,
Well, of course.
we don't see it.
Anytime that you tell private equity, we'll give you money to do stuff, they'll do it.
Yeah, true.
So yeah, I mean, if you have handouts for people to do things, they'll do them. And that's kind of the argument why we should not have subsidies for the oil industry and the fossil fuel industry. Now, I am not trying to give people false hope, right? I'm trying to be very clear that the action that we see is wholly inadequate, right? Again, just for some mathematical comparison, there are 1,000 billions in 1 trillion. We were originally going to spend between 10 to 20 trillion dollars, and we're only spending 370 billion. So we are way undershooting this.
Yeah.
But nonetheless, this is like a doctor recognizing that the patient has responded to a defibrillator. Okay, the heart is now resuscitated. There is life in the body. Presumably, we can continue with treatment and hopefully see some type of increase in the health here. But no, let's be realistic. We face a problem, and that's why I wanted to show the global emissions trend. As you can see, the global emissions trend shows that we're still pretty much on the same trajectory we've been on. And unfortunately, as the US actually declines in emissions, we're going to see countries like India skyrocket and blow off. But we're also seeing rapid development in the African theater as well. And remember, a large portion, almost 4 billion humans, live on the African continent, and we're
Yep.
going to see throughout the 21st century a rapid industrialization of the African continent, and their emissions. I mean, and it will be obviously a mix of solar and wind and all these other cool things that we're talking about. But even if 50% of their industrial might comes from fossil fuels, we're going to see a very considerable total, atmospheric burden. So that is something to be somewhat concerned about, and that's why I wanted to really highlight those two graphs. Is that even though you see the U.S. emission line going in the declining position, it's not having that much of an effect on the global standard yet. And the reason why is because, again, the U.S. population is only 5%. Yes, we're quite affluent. We consume a lot. We emit a lot. But again, we're only 5% of the total world's population. And so as the rest of the world pursues our lifestyles, we're going to see that our limited action is going to be overwhelmed.
And they're having their climate weeks in Africa and the Middle East and Latin America and the Asian Pacific, as you see here. And the people, that's one of the issues, is that people don't want to say, well, gee, they got to live this way for so long, and now we're going to get the short end of the stick. The global north, they made all the pollution, and now we're never going to reap the benefits of industrialization like we should have. It's a lot of anger.
Well, and that is the argument that obviously developing countries are putting forth, is that of course the rich North was able to mindlessly industrialize their societies and actually cause, I would probably argue, almost 90% of the present day crisis, which again is really scary. That really just the United States, Europe, are centrally responsible for this. I mean, obviously Japan, South Korea, the other industrialized countries have their contributions as well.
Yeah.
But it's so interesting to think that less than 20% of the world's population is responsible for 90%. Actually, it's less than that. It's about 10% of the world's population is responsible for 90% of the crisis. And then that 90% is actually trying to pursue the same type of lifestyles the 10% pursued. And there's not going to be, and this is a real concern. I mean, people are starting to realize there's not enough lithium on the planet. If we're trying to do this, there's not enough rare earth elements that are easily accessible for us to do this. So we really actually have to change our consumption patterns and our development patterns. So it's not just about transferring our energies.
Right. And that's what a lot of people were having questions on. Rollins Switch said it is impossible to cut emissions while building out a renewable grid and new mining production.
Yeah, in total, right? So that's the point, right? So you could see, obviously, in the US case, we are cutting emissions, but in the rest of the world, where they're still actually growing quite rapidly, there's not an uncoupling that's happened. And as we continue to pursue growth, it will be more difficult to achieve this uncoupling of emissions and growth.
Okay. Karen had said, abysmal response so far to climate mitigation. I hope the down payment starts soon.
Well, yes, I mean, I obviously agree with that. Again, the scale of response that we've had has been very minor. Even in the U.S. case, some people do argue that we've considerably reduced our emissions, and in some sense we have. But again, it's not with the type of urgency of understanding we're talking about an existential crisis that really, really might be game over for us if we allow
Yeah.
this to run amok. So that's the type of way that we need to think about the response. Is it really actionable in the sense that it's responsive to the totality of the crisis that we face, not some type of a budgetary or a line item goal that some narrow administration is just trying to draw so they might say that, hey, look, we've done something about something here.
But that's what it is. I mean, a lot of it is. All right, Nadia. What did Nadia have to say? Nadia was asking how much of this offshoring manufacturing is going to China. I don't know. What were we talking about that earlier? I don't know. Maybe she's
Um,
talking. Are they having a conversation in the chat? All right, we'll come back to that. How about
okay.
this one, Donald? Hi, Donald. In your opinion, do the rich have the resources to avoid climate disaster? And why? And is it that why the rich don't care about it? Ooh, Donald.
So I like taking on this question because there are kind of two trains of thoughts about this. So Elon Musk has really, I think, done damage, and I really like Elon Musk in terms of his character, but people are obviously more than
Still?
their. Well, I was about to say people are more than their character. So his person is more questionable, right? So his
Yeah.
character is obviously look, I'm the Iron
Changed?
Man of the modern era. But so one of the things that I think he's kind of misled the population on, at least one of the serious things, not the Twitter, all that type of stuff. I try not to follow that nonsense.
Okay.
Um, but at least in terms of the climate and the planet and our place here, there is no going to Mars or any other planet to escape the climate crisis. I mean, that's completely fantastical, nonsensical. That is as good as saying I'll just hold my breath during the climate apocalypse or something.
Oh,
It's completely nonsensical.
yeah.
Now, are there underground bunkers? I mean, I don't know. Somebody's asking me,
Right.
could you go to New Zealand and ride this out? No. You
Oh.
couldn't do something like that. When society, let's say if we just didn't do anything and we did allow climate to run amok and so society is collapsing, yes, you could live underground in a bunker for, a given amount of time. No rich person who is seriously thinking about this wants climate change to run amok
Of
because
course
there
not.
is no alternative that brings you even within 1% of the livability we have on the planet right now. So there is no satellite you could build in space. There is no terraforming of another planet. There is no underground bunker that is going to bring you the type of
No, of course not.
satisfaction that we've enjoyed walking out in our boxers on Sunday morning, stretching on our back porch. Nothing, we're not going to have anything close. No, nobody wants to live in a world where the atmospheric level of carbon dioxide is 800 parts per million and you have to wear an oxygen mask outside. Nobody, nobody wants to live in a world where all the coastlines are essentially a Superfund site because we've had catastrophic sea level rise. So
Yeah,
no, there's
absolutely.
there's no
Oh my
there's
God.
there's no amount of resources that a human has that would be able to make them essentially a god in a dying biosphere.
Jesus. Wow. Okay. Singing Way. She wants to know, will it help low income persons to change from, that she's asking, will it help low income persons? Is there assistance for low income to insulate their homes? Um,
So
will
these are
it?
the type of programs that Bernie Sanders was specifically targeting with the original Build Back Better, is because he understood that low income people obviously don't have the money to make the transition.
Right.
And so we were going to provide those types of subsidies, those type of programs where people could weatherize their homes and it wouldn't be an expense to them. So that was part of the plan here, is to understand that we're kind of all in this together and that we have to
Mm-hmm.
pool collectively our funds together to protect people who are more vulnerable. And that's exactly what the plan was geared toward doing. Because obviously we got some very bad faith arguments from the other side saying, poor people don't have the money to weatherize their homes, and these are the same people who don't give a damn if poor people even have homes to live in. But nonetheless,
Yeah, I
those
would
type of
tend to agree with you. Yeah.
those are the type of arguments that they were putting forth. But of course, Bernie Sanders had an answer to that, that when we're going to do these affordable home projects, and so for all new homes, and then of course for pre-existing structures, that we're going to have these weatherizing programs that would make sure that people of low incomes would not be left out. And of course, we can't forget to talk about the fact that obviously if we're moving to emission reduction, we're talking about overall air pollution reduction as well, and millions of people die across the world every year because of emission reduction harm, emission harm in the atmosphere, because they're breathing in brake dust from vehicles, or they're breathing car exhaust from vehicles, or they live close to industrial areas, and so they're breathing in all this particulate matter, and this has obviously horrible effects on the brain, the lungs, the heart.
Mm.
And so obviously there are some potential health benefits also that exist in a cleaner world. So those are things that we could recognize and realize as well, that will have the impact of reducing costs for people. And of course, we know because of environmental racism that oftentimes it is people who are
Oh
the
yeah.
most vulnerable who are put in places that have the worst of these type of environmental impacts.
Which is what somebody else had made a comment about that. I do have one more. Let's see. This is good interaction. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, thank you. Poppy says we'll go into politics a little. Wonder if things would be different if Bernie won, or if Carter had a successful second turn, or even if old Al Gore had won. We can't go back. Yeah, we can't. We can only fantasize, right, Antonio?
And I do
Uh,
every day. I do every day because actually it's very interesting. I mean, if you look at the data, if we've actually would have started making these changes
yeah.
in the Carter administration, the where we are in terms of the crises wouldn't even be arising until about the 2050s or 2060s. So we losing that time has pushed our timeline up. So
Yep.
those things do matter, but all we have now is the present.
And that's a good thing because we really get. I can't think of the long term future. It's like it's just I don't know. I draw a blank with all this happening. But Donald had another one. Unavoidable migration will happen while we transition to cleaner energy.
Yeah, absolutely it will. I was thinking about, as I was looking at California, of course, I just had my recent experience. I celebrated my 29th birthday
I
in
know.
the
I can't. You're such a baby. You're a
in
baby.
the in the Californian Sierra Nevada, and having that experience, seeing the beautiful nature up there, and then of course looking at all of these crazy weather reports, from the immense amounts of snow to the immense amounts of rain that they've been having. And you see it's a very progressive state, at least in terms of the United States. You see that a lot of people put solar panels in their homes. There's big solar panel facilities. There are huge wind turbine farms. A lot of people are trying to move to hybrid or electric vehicles. And even with all of that, there's a little bit of disconnect because, people are not going to get, it's not an instant gratification just because you move to these things doesn't mean you're not going to be dealing with the extremes. No, quite the opposite. Although you are moving to the transition, you still have to deal with the brunt of the extremes that really are a result of our earlier inaction. And so it's kind of this mix where California kind of looks like the future. It's a solarized, electric car-rized, heat
Jet
dome route.
streamized,
Right.
atmospheric riverized. Yeah,
And
yeah.
so, yeah, I mean, you'll definitely see that as the crisis progress, yeah, you'll start to see more electric cars, but you'll also start to see more immigration as other countries really start to take the brunt and don't have the resources to respond like we do here in the United States.
I saw a video today. I didn't pull it up. Somebody sent it to me. I think it was in our Discord, and I think it was Nadia. And I don't know the channel, but the guy said there's going to be two choices when climate migration happens. Either we let them in, or we kill everybody that tries to go over the border, because this is what's going to happen. Do you see any kind of dystopian future like that with the climate migration coming? That our country would actually could get like that? I mean, we are like that. What am I saying? Who am I fooling?
Well, again, I just tell people to go back to the 2007 Age of Consequences report that was put together by John Podesta, of all people, who, if you know anything about politics,
Yes.
his name's been circled around from administration to administration from administration. But yeah, this is the climate future that we do have in store. And I do think that this, at least in terms of our world order, it is going
Our
to
world order.
it
Oh, it
is going
sounds so
to
scary. Boom.
it is going to drastically change under the weight of climate immigration. That's going to be clear here in the United States. Obviously, our problem is going to be our southern border. In Europe, it's going to be North Africa and the Middle East. And in China, it's going to be Indochina and the island Pacific countries, and Malaysia and Indonesia. Same thing with Australia. And these numbers, of course, are much too large for our systems to handle. I mean, look at what happened with Syria after the implosion of the Syrian government and the refugee crisis that
Yeah.
led on from there. I went to school to study international relations and comparative politics, and specifically human rights and the refugee crisis. And of course, we don't have a good history with the resettlement of refugees into new residencies, into new countries. And oftentimes, the sort of human rights abuses that we see to these new immigrant populations really question, how safe and secure a resettlement actually is for a lot of these people. And as we start to see resources become more scarce in the direct relationship to climate change, people are going to become more hostile, more militant, more xenophobic, and more entrenched, more nationalistic. So
We're
we
seeing
certainly
it.
will see more aggressive sentiment toward immigration as the climate crisis goes on.
And that goes to Rollins Switch again. The NIMBY and mining protest movements are doing a fine job of restricting the green transition materials. Why is the media not talking about that? Could be
Well, I
taking a
can't
couple
say
of
why
weeks.
the media isn't talking about a lot of things, so I can't say particularly why they're not talking about this particular thing, but it would
Yeah.
surprise me because most people in the media are millionaires. And so their interests probably aren't that different from NIMBY interest in that respect. Uh,
Yeah.
so, and yeah, that's another problem is that, I remember there was one time, 15 years ago or more, where the conservatives, at least conservative people on the left, were arguing that, Antonio, don't worry about this. Eventually, the country's going to get their act together. And, at the very least, we're going to have this rah, rah, rah approach. Well, the problem with waiting to the deadline before writing your paper is you can't foresee all of the issues that are going to happen, right? So once you start writing the paper, you start to realize, oh God, this isn't just about putting words on paper, but this is actually going in and reading sources and then understanding those sources and then asking the library about librarian where this or that book is, and then it turns out I can't get it for another week. So, so that's kind of the that's kind of the problem that we're running into, is that actually it's not just going to be a go 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 approach. That you have to actually, right now we have a very sophisticated. Listen to people like Peter Zoen. But we have very sophisticated global supply chains. That means that trying to get these materials all together in a way that we can use them to effectively reduce our emissions within the timeline that we have is going to be very difficult. And then if we don't do that, the alternative is to relocate those supply chains, and that's the nice way of saying it, but relocating all that mining and that heavy industrial and processing here. And like you say, people don't want to see, even when I was in California, wind turbine farms and solar arrays are relatively harmless, but you really don't want stuff like that in your backyard. But imagine having mining facility processes and things like that. And then we already see that the industries in America do what they want. So now,
Yeah.
as these new industries, and just because they're not fossil fuels doesn't mean that the processing of these materials are not extremely toxic. Of course, there are toxic materials that are being processed
I
in
think
solar
those
panels
need the
and
flush.
whatnot.
Yeah, let's flush them away. Bye-bye. Yeah, I
Well,
got to get
actually,
that flush in.
let's not flush them away, because then they'll be in the water source.
Oh, jeez. Yeah, you're right. Oh, yeah, the water
So,
sources are a mess. Oh, my God. All right, here, talk about water. What do you have to say about mining the seafloor and making massive lithium mines, processing plants like Thacker Pass? And you've seen what's going on with Max Wilbur and his protests there. What do you think about that?
well, we got to remember that. Okay, we talk about planet Earth, and that's probably again the wrong way to describe our planet, since the surface is 75% water. There are very diverse and fragile ecosystems that exist on the seafloor. So just replacing our destruction of the biosphere, the terrestrial biosphere, with the destruction of the other sea, I don't think it's a fair trade-off. I don't think that's
No.
really the type of progress that we want. But see, that's the problem here, is that once you kind of realize that, you know, the Earth is in a sense like an asteroid, right? People talked about peak oil and peak fossil fuels. I don't actually subscribe or believe in that, because I take the asteroid theory. Like Earth is essentially a massive asteroid, and will never use in any time scale that people today should be really concerned about. We'll never use the resources, all of them up. We'll destroy ourselves well before
Before
we
that,
do that, clearly.
do you think?
Um, well, obviously, look, we won't use
Yeah.
all of the fossil fuels before
No.
we
No.
overheat the planet.
Yeah, that's
Um,
true.
so that's the problem with these type of schemes, is that. But what I will say in terms of the batteries is that we do actually have a good alternative, and it's called sodium ion. And sodium ion is a lot more plentiful. It's a lot more easier to actually extract than lithium, and it's a lot less environmentally damaging,
Okay.
and it's much more abundant. So actually, that transfer of technologies is actually a lot easier and a lot less complicated. But unfortunately, it's not at the ready. And what we're seeing right now is that people are actually bringing these lithium technologies to scale, and that will be problematic. We're going to have to deal with the environmental crises that come out of lithium extraction.
Boy. Oh, how's everybody doing out there? Let me see if there's anything else. Anybody that had a good question. I don't know. Human said something about add the message on to Beckwith's latest video. Did you see it? He talked about. Paul already covered. He already covered the IPCC, but I watched them all today. Got super duper depressed. As my Discord people know. But is there something else you would like to go over that I have maybe in the assessment report or anything?
I don't know. Do we have any more questions? I was enjoying that.
Okay, it's always great. It is because here our chat is extremely interactive, and that is what we like. So let me find you guys again. I think I lost you. I lost the little chat. Oh, it went all the way over on the other screen. All right, guys, let's see. Questions. Let's see. Well, David had said apparently scientists are trying to find a way of sinking. Oh, they were talking about the seaweed blob on its way to sink the seaweed before it hits the coast, as decaying seaweed is toxic to pregnant women and huge methane mess when it decomposes. What do you think about that mess that's coming on its way? The sargassum.
Well, it certainly is one of the least of our worries.
I
But
think
yes,
for animals, maybe not.
it is something that ought to be taken care of. But yeah, I mean, it poses, I think, the threats that the scientists are saying is legitimate and real, and the impact it will have for the coastal economies once it starts to kind of crash ashore. So yeah.
All right, let's see. Our good old Rollin switch. What do you think about CO2 removal from the atmosphere?
I think that it obviously, this is going back to the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. The assessments or the models that showed us keeping or getting back to 1.5, all of them obviously included robust atmospheric removal of CO2 and other greenhouse gases from the atmosphere. And of course, even to stay within the 2 degrees, many of the models also incorporated carbon dioxide removal as well. Right now, there are some feasible startup technologies that look like they will be able to at least do that for us. The problem obviously is scale, and then what to do with that physical material once you actually extract it from the atmosphere. Where are you going to store that material? But I do believe that it certainly does have a role to play.
Okay. I have a question. So, because astrologer Climate Witness said they're still allowing cruise ships and professional sports, casinos, luxury hotels. I mean, what do you think about business as usual, Antonio? That's been going on, BAU, good old business as usual. What are your thoughts?
Well, I, you know, I just think about, of course, business as usual is going on. I'm here in North Carolina, and we've experienced certainly the warmest winter I've ever lived through. Spring has come over a month early for us, and people are going about their day as usual. And so I don't think that disconnect is going to be foreign elsewhere in our society. So it doesn't necessarily surprise me that we're experiencing this type of disconnect. But listen, I don't think that this disconnect is new. Part of the reason why I go backpacking out in nature is because I like to witness, well, I think it's more than that, to be a part
Yeah,
of the rhythm of nature. And
me too.
I tell my friends who aren't familiar with this, but when you're out in the woods, you go down with the sun and you come up with the sun. And there are a whole host of other creatures and life forms that are rising along
Yeah.
with you. And when you're in that rhythm, you realize you aren't at all special, at least not in some type of unique way. You're no more special than all the other life forms that are going to sleep with you and waking up with you. And of course, as you go to sleep, there's a whole nother set of life forms that kind of wake up. And so there's this trade off. But when you're moving in the rhythm, I think these things matter to you more. And most humans, obviously, in civilization, are completely outside of the natural rhythm. And so I think it's really hard for us to grasp what we're actually doing, not only to ourselves, but to the planet. And so you have these series of disconnects. People aren't concerned about why does it feel like summertime in January, because they were never concerned about the outside. The outside was always
Yeah.
kind of a matrix to them.
I think, and I look at these comment sections and I see these people writing, "Oh, it's saying it's a hoax," and that whenever it snows, I on these weather channels I follow, whenever it snows, there's always the invariable clueless moron that will go, "Huh, so global warming, huh? It's snowing." I mean, I can't stand it. How do you deal with it, Antonio? How do you deal with it? Or do you even come around? I mean, do you know anybody like this? I do.
Yeah, I come in contact with this a lot, but ultimately, this is the crisis of our species, right? We're smart enough to look up into the night sky and to wonder why,
Yeah.
but ultimately, as a species, it seems that we're not willing, obviously, to deal with the hard realities that make us uncomfortable, and so we would rather those realities be other things, and that desire to turn reality into a fantasy is so real for us as human beings. It's actually fundamental to who we are, right?
Right. It's
Thousands and thousands of
religion.
years ago, before civilization, we sat around the fire and told each other stories. Those stories were not real, and we're still doing that, but we not realizing to the perverse effect.
No, we're doing it on social media with televangelists, con men.
So,
All right.
so we've sort of lost control of our own
Yeah, we have.
species narrative, and
Good one.
the narrative was at one point that we were moving forward and we did understand, and now the narrative is we're kind of pretending not to know.
I'm telling you, you're right. You're right. All right, Trulia. Any thoughts on what to expect in the next 18 months with the likely super El Nino? And remember, guys, Nick's going to be here Friday night. So those are also Nick questions.
Yeah, that's definitely more of a Nick question than it
Yeah.
is an Antonio Reid question, but I'll take it as a non-expert or someone. I don't know exactly, obviously, what will happen, but I would suspect that we're going to have. Remember, the last kind of super El Nino was during 2016, and that peaked in as the hottest year on the planet. So
Yeah.
that might kind of be a bit of a preview for what we're going to see, and we're already starting to see a lot of destabilized weather patterns happening around the planet already. So, this El Nino 2023-24 could really be a showstopper, so to speak.
Oh boy. Yeah, well, there's some worries amongst the gardeners. All right, so we're going on. Yeah, I am one of them, but we're going on an hour, and I would like to keep it that way. So Nadia says, Blue Ocean event 2024. I don't know,
We'll
Nadia.
see.
Yeah, that's a Paul Beckwith. That's a Jim Massa. Maybe even Nicholas. Maybe even Nicholas.
Jim, I missed Jim.
Yeah, well, we're gonna get a state of the planet together. I promise. We're going to do that, guys. We everybody's busy, so busy. But it's yeah, showstopper. She says that's probably pretty accurate. Yeah. Yep. All right. Well, would you like to give us a nice little parting
Yeah.
talk? Okay.
So, you guys know me. I've been in this community for some time, and I think part of what I've been experiencing is just you know, I'm coming to accept where we are. I try to find the good where it is, and I think that's important that we try to
Mm-hmm.
find the good where it is,
Me too.
and that when we do find that good, however small it might be, that we take time to really celebrate that. And
I like
do what we
that.
can where we can, but do take time to celebrate the good in our lives. And thank you guys so very much for joining us this evening to talk about climate change, intergovernmental and climate change, and where we are with our emissions. And I hope that at least given a little hope to people that we've at least started on the pathway of some action.
However long it lasts, right? To start. I mean, what can I say? I'm doomer adjacent. I changed to doomer adjacent after Dr. Jeremy, Jeremy Jimenez from Cortland, Sam's friend, that he's from here. Well, he came up with doomer adjacent. I kind of like it. It leaves a little wiggle room for when you're at least a parent. You have some thoughts of maybe like my kid, like you, that there's something, but it's not hopium, no. And I don't like the labels, but anyway. And Ton says, well said, Antonio. Well said. We definitely love you, and you will come back soon, and we will have a state of the planet. Definitely a state of the planet. All right, guys. Thank you. We love you.
All righty.